Hello friends, I hope you are all doing good. Welcome back to the Videsh Niti series, and the topic of discussion for today is the India United Kingdom Free Trade Agreement talks. Let's have a quick small analysis as to what the talks are and why they are important. So friends, if you look at the scenario of the world today, the reason why firstly Britain is trying to go for this free trade agreement with India is primarily because since the time of the Brexit, the British have been looking for new friends across the world. That is the first thing. So, British policy, which earlier was purely dependent upon the trade with the Europeans and being a part of the Eurozone, because they were earlier solely focused on engaging with the European countries only. Now that dependency has somehow broken down. So, as a result of which, what has happened now is that the British people are basically trying to look for allies across the world. And it is in this context that the Indo Pacific region, where India plays a very prominent role, figures very sharply in the overall approach of the British. Second important factor is, friends, that today, because of the pandemic, what has happened is that the countries all over the world which till now were dependent upon the Chinese, are trying to undertake a decoupling. So, decoupling in a simple language means that they are basically trying to look for alternatives where they can get access to resources and where they don't have to depend upon China for every aspect of their economic activity or their strategic activity. So, consequently, what has happened today is that in this era of decoupling, India, being one of the prominent countries which also can play a vital role in the region, is basically being looked by the Britain today as a potential market. And also, let us not forget one thing, that the British people for a very long period of time in their past have been pretty much big supporters of trade with the Chinese. And in fact, they have not only assisted the Chinese in their growth, but they have themselves taken a lot of assistance from the Chinese for their own growth. But today, over a period of time, with the real motives of China coming into fore in front of everyone, with real face of China being exposed in front of everyone, that how they intend to aspire for global supremacy and how they intend to do that approach by decimating countries in the world, by demolishing their power status rather than giving them regard and respect, and their blatant disregard for the international norms and rules, has compelled the Britain to adopt a very hawkish attitude. So as a result of which today Britain looks basically at the entire Chinese place as a very hawkish country, and they look at it in a very negative sense. That gives India a larger space in the British scheme of things. And today, if we collectively look at the two factors above with the third factor, which is the AUKUS, which is a nuclear alliance that has been recently proposed in the region, one thing is very clear, that today the Americans also want the British to play a larger role in the Indo-Pacific region. So as a result of which today, if we look at the larger picture, then one, British, driven by their own domestic necessities because of the Brexit, are looking outside. Two, their behavior because of the decoupling pandemic and their perception of China has led them to look at the Indo-Pacific region. Third, the AUKUS is a means by which officially the UK is likely to have a much larger presence in the entire Indo-Pacific region. Now, if we look at the Indian part, so why is India trying to go for this FTA? So you see, India has been doing these FTA talks with a lot of countries for a very long period of time. But somehow, whenever we talk to any country with respect to the FTA, the problem that happens is that, we have our own concerns with respect to negative list. We have our own concern about sensitive items of trade. So normally what happens is that we start our discussions with a lot of fanfare and we give out too many commitments. But when it comes to actual, you know, game of substance on the ground, that is the place where we happen to lack. So somehow our track record apparently is not really very good when it comes to concluding the FTAs. And for that matter, at a time when the entire world is going for these kind of regional minilaterals and these kind of agreements like the RCEP, that is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership of the US, India has realized one thing, that if it wants to be a part of the global supply chains, if it wants to leverage the Atmanirbhar Bharat overall approach that we have created, then India has to understand one thing, that strategic partnership with countries is not going to be the only thing. India has understood one thing, that if it wants to play an important role in shaping the global events, then it has to give substance to the strategic partnership. And the substance to the strategic partnership purely comes only with by going for economic integration. So India apparently has learnt from its past mistakes, that how the slow FTA negotiations and how the irritants in the way the negotiations happen have put us in a backseat. So India is trying to work on that. And it is in this context that today India looks at this entire FTA with Britain in a very renewed sense. So today what India basically wants to do in this FTA thing with UK is that we want to go for an early harvest agreement first. Now, economically speaking, many economists are pretty against this idea. So what happens in an early harvest agreement is that you have a kind of a mini FTA before. Try doing testing of how the things work and then go for a full-fledged FTA later. So normally why the economists are pretty against this idea is because they believe that if you go for a small agreement first and then you go for a proper FTA, then there are a lot of irritants. But considering that our track record has been such that we negotiate for such a prolonged period of time, that the negotiations get prolonged for so long that we don't get the result at the end of the day. So it is in this backdrop that what has happened is that applying this new methodology and going for an early harvest agreement first and then going for an FTA is a very different way of thinking, which we must welcome and which we must see in a positive sense, because there is no harm in giving it a try. And if you look at the broader contents of what we are trying to talk about, then we are trying to talk about multiple things that range not only from goods and services purely, which dominate normally the FTAs which are there, but goes beyond that. So today in the FTA, we want to talk about the digital technologies. We want to talk about artificial intelligence. We want to talk about digital currencies. So there are host of items on which we want to leverage our position with the British, and we want to leverage the British position with respect to us. So it is in this backdrop that this FTA, our approach to this FTA, relatively looks slightly better. So in this sense, we must welcome this renewed approach by India, and we must try to give India the benefit of doubt that in case we go on to establish a successful early harvest agreement, and then let's say this early harvest agreement leads eventually to the FTA by the end of this year, as the trade ministers of the two countries argue today, then it can actually set a good template for India's economic integration and India's economic diplomacy. Because today, India's economic diplomacy is actually witnessing a downfall. And it is in this context of this downfall that this UK's agreement gives us a renewed push, where we can actually create a template and showcase to the other countries with whom we are negotiating the FTAs, be it the South Koreans with which we have a comprehensive economic partnership agreement planned, be it the Canadians or be it the Australians, any of them. At last, let's not forget one thing. The FTA is definitely going to be a positive aspect if it works out. And UK coming and trying to play a major role under the umbrella of AUKUS in the Indo-Pacific region is going to be a welcome step anytime, considering that we do have a shared past of a colonial history with them and a relatively decent relationship throughout the Cold War and the post-Cold War with the British, with minor irritants that have been always worked out. India and UK can actually rewrite their relationship, and this FTA offers us the hope that the two countries will be able to establish a deep relationship not only at the political level but also at the economic level. Thank you.